So I was introduced by Jan as a expert. I'm not an expert, all right. I am just someone who is passionate about this subject. The subject of how do we communicate more effectively about science and technology. How does this work? There we go. And I'm not just passionate about this, my company is passionate about it. So, you know, we talked a lot about the landscape. And this is the landscape. The public is bombarded with negative messages about what we do. And if it's not negative, at the very least, it's unbalanced. There's not a balanced discussion and dialogue going on out there. So that's what we're talking about today, right? How do we communicate more effectively about what we do and the importance of what we do and where science and technology fit into that? Now, I applaud, Rob, I applaud what Monsanto's doing and trying to communicate more broadly. I was largely disappointed in the Super Bowl commercials except for yours. So I think what's important when we stop to think about, all right, how are we going to communicate? How are we going to communicate more effectively? It's very important first for an organization like Elanco or any company to kind of get grounded in and I heard it earlier, you know, what are we about? So this whole journey for us in communicating more proactively about what we do and the importance of technology in food production started 10 years ago, or over 10 years ago. And it started with a vision and mission update and exercise. Now, how many of you have been part of that? That's not necessarily the most exciting or impactful thing that you go through in a company's history. Not necessarily. I've been through those that were not very impactful. And all it did was change the words on the plaque on the wall. And that's all it did. For us, this time around, it changed us. For Elanco, it changed us. Because 10 years ago, we stopped seeing ourselves as an animal health company and started seeing ourselves as a company that's in the food business. That ultimately, what we do enables the production of safe, affordable, abundant food. And in our case, protein, right? Animal protein. That changed us. I wouldn't say it was immediate, but in the years ensuing, it changed how we thought about things. And 4 years ago, it led us to establish a group that we call in our company a department called Food Industry and Consumer Affairs. And the charter of that group is to start calling on the food chain. Because if you see yourself as being in the food business, even though your products and your services may be targeted more toward the production side, if you see yourself as being in the food business, then you have a responsibility to communicate to the entire food chain. And what we were starting to see 4 or 5 years ago is retailers and packers and processors and food manufacturers starting to make decisions about technology and saying, we're not going to promote the use of this technology, or we won't allow our chain, our suppliers, to use this technology, and we'll use it to try and differentiate ourselves in the meat case or in the dairy case. So the tools were being taken out of the hands and are being taken out of the hands of producers. And other geographies, other countries have experienced this in spades. So we saw it our duty to start communicating more effectively to the food chain. And not just about our products. In fact, most of our products are not mentioned when we talk to the food chain. We're talking about technology and the importance of technology and where it fits. So not only do we establish this group, this Food Industry and Consumer Affairs group, our president, Jeff Simmons, has written 2 white papers, and I'm sure many of you have been exposed to these white papers, maybe even been part of audiences that have that the white paper has been presented to. And that's not my purpose today. My purpose today is to kind of lift the veil and tell you a little bit about the strategy of those white papers and our communication strategy. So I submit this to you very humbly. This is not the answer. It's been our approach. And it's one approach. And I think we have had some impact, but it's only part of the dialogue and part of the equation. So I submit it to you for your contemplation, and hopefully we can learn some things from each other today. So what do you think was one of the first things we heard when we started calling on retailers? And I'll tell you, we have been in the boardroom of every major grocery retailer in the United States and several around the world in the last 3 years. We've been in those boardrooms. What do you think we heard when it came to the subject of technology and science in food production? Almost unanimously, the first smokescreen that was put up is, well, consumers don't want it. Consumers do not want it. We're just, the reason we've taken some of the positions we have in labeling and so on and so forth is because our consumers don't want it. We're just doing what our consumers want. So you take that information, you process it, and say, okay, is that really the case? So one of the very first things we did to learn for ourselves, as well as to be more informed when we're talking to retailers, is we commissioned a study. Hired 2 agricultural economists, and we looked at 10 years of data, market research data, 10 years. And those of you that are familiar with market research, there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it. Political polling is a good example of bad way to do it. All right, so market research, I started my career in Elanco market research. To be valid, you can't lead the witness. All right, you just can't do that. So if you ask a consumer, are you concerned about hormones in your milk? Well, what do you think the answer is going to be, right? If, on the other hand, you ask consumers, how do you make your buying decisions? Give us your set of criteria for your buying decisions. How do you choose what products to buy in the dairy case or the meat case? And then you follow it up with behavior, because consumers often do things very differently than what they tell you they're going to do in a survey. So that was the purpose of looking at this data set. Under those 2 criteria, consumer spending data had to be incorporated in it, and it had to be good research, non-biased research. So here's the result. 28 studies we looked at from 26 countries, 97, almost 100,000 consumers. This is a big body of data, and over a 10-year period of time. Here's what the data told us. 95% of consumers are most concerned when they make their food buying decisions about taste, nutrition, and cost. That's how they primarily make their food buying decisions. That wasn't a huge surprise to us. That we thought that that's probably the way it was. We were surprised at the magnitude, 95%. Another 4% primarily make their choices, we'll call them more lifestyle buyers, if you will. They make their choices on, hey, how was it raised? Where was it grown? What production methods? Is it organic? Those kinds of decisions. And the point needs to be made here that none of us are entirely in one category or the other. We kind of float back and forth. So primarily, we fall in one category or the other, but we float back and forth. Every time I buy a Starbucks, when I'm at the airport, because it's convenient, I'm in the lifestyle buyer. I treat myself to a Starbucks once in a while, even when I could buy it at McDonald's, for a third of the cost, 25% of the cost. We float back and forth between the 2. And then we have to talk about the minority, the fringe, if you will. And that's a very small percentage. And this needs to be part of our discussion and our debate today, is because too often it's this segment that's influenced policy, that has influenced public opinion, if you will, that's doing a better job of telling the story than what we are. They're well-funded, they're patient, and they're well-organized. And I don't doubt the sincerity of people that are advocates for certain positions. I don't doubt their sincerity. But the problem that we have in agriculture is they're winning the war. They're getting the mind share. They're getting the attention. They're getting the messages out. And we're not doing such a good job ourselves.